What is going on, everybody? What is going on? The Catch Fam, my name is John Dawson, and in today's video, we are going to be hopping into 3 streaming options at the quarterback and the tight end position as we approach week 1 of the 2023 fantasy football season. So if you guys are new to the channel, all we do here is free fantasy football content all year round, redraft, dynasty, and best ball. So if you guys are into that, be sure to subscribe on the way in. Other than that, guys, get in the comments down below any questions you guys have as we move into week 1, starts, sits, waiver wires, trades, whatever it may be. Let me know. I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can. But other than that, let's not waste any more time. Let's hop into today's video. All right, number 1 overall, I've got Jared Goff, who in a lot of single quarterback redraft formats is still not getting drafted. And, he was a top 10 fantasy quarterback last year, over 4,400 passing yards, 29 passing touchdowns, 7 picks on the season. Was literally the quarterback 10 last year. And, I get it. There's not a ton of receiving options on this team after Amon-Ra St. Brown. Jahmyr Gibbs is going to bring some upside out of the backfield in terms of a receiving back, and that's going to be helpful. And Sam Laporta could have an impact as well at the tight end position. But then we're looking at Marvin Jones and Josh Reynolds. So I get there's some concerns, but obviously as an offense, the Lions took a step forward last year, and I think they'll be just fine this season as well. So they get the Chiefs tonight in week 1. Should be a high scoring affair. If you're in a position where maybe you punted the quarterback position, or maybe you're just trying to get some depth, whatever it may be, I do think that Jared Goff is worth streaming in week 1 against Kansas City. Then when we look at the next couple of weeks, he gets Seattle in week 2. Should be a high scoring affair, even if that Seattle defense, I think, looks pretty good on paper. Then they get Atlanta. They could be an improved defense. Don't get me wrong. They've got some good players, but should be a good matchup. Then they're at Green Bay in week 4. Should be a competitive game, even though it's a decent defense. Then week 5, they get Carolina. Not the best matchup, not the worst, but ultimately, I do think there's enough opportunity through the first couple of weeks that Jared Goff will put up a good enough floor and a decent enough ceiling that he's worth rostering. And here, especially in week 1 against Kansas City, where they're going to be likely playing from behind and competing against Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid as a head coach, I do think Jared Goff is worth streaming moving in to week 1. All right, next up on the list, call me crazy, but I've got Brock Purdy. If you guys have followed the channel throughout the offseason, you guys know I'm a fan of Brock Purdy, and some of you guys might be laughing right now, but seriously, against Pittsburgh, this does feel like a trap game for the Niners. And I do think this will be a competitive game and potentially a lower scoring game because both these defenses have enough playmakers. But Brock Purdy and all of his starts last year through the fantasy season, at least 15 or more fantasy points with a ceiling of 21 points, 16 or more fantasy points in all those games except for week 13. So we know the floor is decent. We know this is an efficient offense. You've got a ton of playmakers, right? Debo, Ayuk, hopefully Kittle's out there. You got C-Mac, you got Eli Mitchell. We got names on this offense that are going to make big plays. Everything is in front of Brock Purdy. He should be able to put up a decent stat line if you're in a bad enough position at the quarterback position. Outside of that, he gets the Rams in week 2. We know that defense is going to be really bad this year. Then he gets the Giants, not the best matchup necessarily, but not the worst. Could be a good competitive game. Then in week 4, he gets Arizona, a great matchup. So Brock Purdy should be on the streaming radar for the next couple of weeks. He does get Dallas in week 5. Not a great matchup there, but the first 4 weeks of the season, I think he's worth rostering if you need help at the quarterback position. And I think here in week 1, he gives you a decent enough floor to consider as a start if you need to do so. All right, 3rd overall, I've got Jordan Love. I do think Love is worth a start if you need help at the quarterback position against the Chicago Bears. We know this defense made some improvements in the preseason, but probably not enough quite yet. Jordan Love looked very solid throughout the preseason. Overall, looked good in training camp. The big thing for Love, I think, to monitor, of course, is the health of Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs. But me personally, I think they'll be out there. He'll have his 2 primary playmakers. We've got some young guys on this team in Luke Musgrave and Jaden Reed who can make an impact. And we've got a good run game. And we've got a good play caller in Matt LaFleur as a head coach. So Jordan Love's been sitting behind one of the best quarterbacks in the league and Aaron Rodgers for the past couple of years. We'll see what he's made of. Like I said, preseasons look good. Training camp looked good, but we'll see what he's made of in this first start. But he gets a good matchup against the Bears in week 1. I definitely think he's somebody you can stream if you need to do so. But moving forward, he gets Atlanta in week 2. Good enough matchup. Admittedly, a bad matchup in week 3 against the Saints, but then we should get a good divisional matchup against the Detroit Lions in week 4. I like that. But then I really like the matchup in week 5 against the Las Vegas Raiders, who's going to have one of the worst defenses in the league this year. So Jordan Love in a good enough position that he should be on the streaming radar for the next couple of weeks. And if you really need to go out and stream a quarterback for some reason in week 1, I think he's worth a start. All right, moving on to the tight end position. I will say if Cole Kmet is available, you pick him up. If Tyler Higbee is available, you pick him up. But in a lot of leagues, I don't think those guys are going to be available. But if you're in a smaller league, those guys need to be rostered, in my opinion. But let's move on to Juwan Johnson. We're going to talk about briefly here. He was the tight end 15 in full PPR last season, 508 receiving yards, 42 receptions, 7 receiving touchdowns. Change of quarterback here. We no longer have the Jameis Winston, Andy Dalton, Taysom Hill show. We've got Derek Carr, and there are other playmakers on this team at the wide receiver position. We know that. Chris Olave is going to be a baller. Michael Thomas, if he's alive and can, suit up and be on the football field, is going to be impactful. Don't get me wrong. And then I like Rashid Shaheed a lot. And I think that A.T. Perry and Traquan Smith could be sprinkled in there maybe. Good enough run game between Jamal Williams and Kendre Miller. And as time goes on, Alvin Kamara. But ultimately, while this is not a great matchup against the Tennessee Titans, Juwan Johnson, very respectable stat line last year. Top 15 tight end in fantasy. I just think he's worth rostering at the end of the day. If you absolutely punted the tight end position, Juwan Johnson is absolutely worth the addition. Not the best matchup against the Titans. I get it. Next week he gets Carolina, then Green Bay, then Tampa Bay, then New England. The schedule overall is not great, but I do think Juwan Johnson should be on the streaming radar for the tight end position. And if you're in a bad enough spot in week 1, I do think he's worth starting as we approach Sunday. All right, next up for the tight end position, I've got Gerald Everett, who was a tight end 13 in full PPR last year, 58 receptions, 555 receiving yards, and 4 receiving touchdowns. So when we look at this matchup here in week 1 against the Miami Dolphins, what do I expect? I expect points. I expect fantasy points. I expect playmakers all over the field. Now, when we look at this offense, right, Austin Eckler is going to catch passes out of the backfield. We know that. We know that Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, very talented guys, different types of wide receivers, they're going to get their volume. And we know that Quentin Johnston could be a factor as a rookie. And we know that Josh Palmer could also be a factor as well moving into his second season. But in this game against the Dolphins, like I said, I expect points and fantasy points. I think Gerald Everett can get enough volume to put up a decent stat line. He gets Tennessee in week 2, not the best matchup, but it could be worse. Then he gets Minnesota. We love that. Awful secondary. Then he gets the Raiders in week 4. We love that. Another awful secondary. I will say the Chargers have an early bye week. They're on bye in week 5. Then they get Dallas in week 6. So be aware of that. But man, through the first 4 games, getting a high scoring matchup, in my opinion, in Miami, then Minnesota in week 3 and the Raiders in week 4. Very solid. I get it. A lot of playmakers here, but change at offensive coordinator. We now have Kellen Moore as offensive coordinator for the Chargers. When we look at the Cowboys the past couple of years, part of this could have been due to Dak Prescott and his tendencies. But that offense did prefer the tight end position. I think there's a pretty good path overall for Gerald Everett, even with a stacked wide receiver room and one of the best receiving backs, if not the best receiving back in the league, and Austin Eckler on this team. So if you're in a tough spot, week 1, check if Gerald Everett's available. I think he's worth streaming, and he's got a couple good matchups moving into the beginning of the season. All right, last but not least, I'm going to make a case for Dawson Knox. Yeah, I get it. There's another tight end. He's young. His name's Dalton Kincaid. He's a receiving threat. He's a dynamic player. I get it. I totally get it. But my case here is that it could take a little bit of time for Dalton Kincaid to get acclimated and really for the Bills to really establish what his role is going to be. Is he going to line up in the slot? Is he going to be a red zone threat? Is he going to be a vertical guy that stretches the field? Is he going to play like a true traditional tight end? We don't really know. I get it. I think Kincaid's going to be a factor this year. They drafted him for a reason. They didn't draft a receiver in the first round. I totally get it. But Dawson Knox knows this offense, and more importantly, he has the chemistry with Josh Allen already. And in the past 2 seasons, he has 15 touchdowns overall, all from Josh Allen. I just think there's going to be moments throughout the season, and it could be early on, where Josh Allen targets Dawson Knox in the red zone. And even if he isn't scoring, 3 touchdowns through the first 6 weeks, if he has enough red zone targets, that's going to put him on the streaming radar for the tight end position. So all I'm saying is, Dawson Knox, recently got the contract, got extended and everything. I just don't think that the Bills are done with him. And I don't think he's just going to be out there as a blocking tight end, especially with the chemistry he already has with Josh Allen. There's going to be moments where those plays boil down and Josh Allen is going to start looking for Dawson Knox. Okay. So if he scores even just 2 touchdowns in the first 5 or 6 weeks of the season, I think that is respectable enough that we need to keep an eye on Dawson Knox. And there's definitely a world where Dalton Kincaid can be productive, bring some nice upside to your roster, and Dawson Knox can still be a decent floor guy who also still has fantasy value. So he gets the Jets in week 1, not the best matchup by any means. He gets Las Vegas in week 2, though. We really like that matchup. He gets Washington, once again, not a great matchup. But then at home, they have Miami, and then they have the Jacksonville Jaguars. Then they have the New York Giants. I like all those matchups, even though I respect most of those defenses. Those are the type of games that the Bills, when they come to the table, they're going to be looking to be putting up points against those teams. And on the other hand, the Dolphins, Jaguars, and Giants are also going to be looking to match those points. So I like all those matchups. Sometimes even if the defenses are good, it's still okay because both offenses are going to be firing on all cylinders. So all I'm saying is Knox is a player that we should certainly be considering streaming and maybe rostering if you're in a bad spot at the tight end position as we approach week 1 of the season. And that'll do it for today's video. If you guys did find today's video helpful or enjoyable in any way, all I ask is that you guys consider subscribing on the way out. We'd love to have you guys as a member of the Catch Fam community as we move into the 2023 fantasy football season. Like I said at the beginning of the video, all we do here is free fantasy football content all year round, redraft, dynasty, and best ball. So if you're into that, be sure to subscribe on the way out. But other than that, guys, get in the comment section down below anything you guys need moving into week 1 and as we move into the season as a whole. Starts, sits, trades, roster reviews, whatever you guys need, I will get back to you as soon as I possibly can. And be sure to look out for our next live stream where you guys can come in and ask me any fantasy questions. And I'll get back to you right on the spot. But other than that, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed the content today. And with that, I will say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. And remember, you saw it here on The Catch.